A young black man marries a wealthy white woman, and whispers of gold digging fill the air. But as their secrets unravel, the truth shocks everyone, and leaves them questioning everything they thought they knew. The grand ballroom shimmered with opulence, but whispers of scandal rippled through the air like wildfire. Eleanor Hartley, a wealthy and commanding white woman in her late 60s, entered arm in arm with Caleb James, a young black man in his 20s. Heads turned, conversations paused, and judgment filled the room. Eleanor was no stranger to gossip. A self-made millionaire who had built her empire from scratch, she carried herself with an air of authority and elegance. But even she couldn't ignore the murmurings of the crowd. Who is he? A gold digger, obviously. What could she possibly see in someone like him? The comments were venomous, laced with the kind of prejudice Eleanor had faced in her own way throughout her rise to power. But tonight wasn't about her past. It was about Caleb. Caleb stood tall beside her, his deep brown skin radiant under the glow of the chandeliers. Though his tailored suit fit him perfectly, his posture betrayed his unease. He could feel the weight of their stares, the unspoken assumptions, the audacity of his presence in this room. For Eleanor, Caleb wasn't just a partner. He was a calculated choice. And for Caleb, this wasn't just a marriage. It was a means to escape the struggles that had defined his life. But neither could have anticipated how this arrangement would expose truths they both had tried to bury. Their story began in the most unlikely of places, a charity auction. Caleb, a struggling musician and part-time waiter, had been hired to work the event. Eleanor, seated in the VIP section, had noticed him immediately. It wasn't just his appearance, youthful yet weary, confident yet cautious. It was the way he carried himself, as though he were out of place but determined to belong. At the end of the night, as Caleb packed up his gear, Eleanor approached him. "You play beautifully," she said, her voice crisp but warm. "Do you take requests?" Caleb, startled by her presence, managed a polite smile. "I do, ma'am, but I'm done for the evening." Her smile widened. "Good, then I won't waste your time. I have a business proposition for you." The next day, Caleb arrived at Eleanor's mansion, unsure of what to expect. Her home was a stark contrast to the cramped apartment he shared with two roommates. Eleanor wasted no time. "I need a partner," she said bluntly. "Someone to marry." Caleb nearly choked on his coffee. "Excuse me?" "This isn't about romance," Eleanor continued. "It's about appearances. I need someone young, sharp and charming by my side. And you, Caleb, fit the bill perfectly." Caleb leaned back, skeptical. "Why me?" "What's the catch?" Eleanor's gaze hardened. "I don't like repeating myself. You're intelligent, presentable, and you'll gain access to a life most people only dream of. You help me, I help you. Simple as that." Caleb hesitated. He'd heard stories of arrangements like this, relationships built on power and necessity rather than love. But the prospect of financial stability was tempting. After all, he'd spent years struggling, juggling odd jobs to make ends meet. "What's in it for you?" Caleb asked. Eleanor smiled faintly. "Let's just say I have unfinished business, and you're the key to closing that chapter." With that, Caleb agreed, though not without reservations. He told himself it was just a transaction, a temporary arrangement. But as he settled into his new role, he couldn't ignore the growing complexities of their relationship, or the secrets Eleanor seemed intent on keeping. The ceremony was small but lavish, attended only by Eleanor's closest associates and a handful of curious onlookers. Caleb had never imagined himself in a tuxedo, standing in front of a crowd, exchanging vows with a woman twice his age. Eleanor's voice was steady as she recited her promises, but Caleb caught glimpses of something deeper in her eyes, a mix of vulnerability and determination. It unnerved him, but he pushed the feeling aside. As they walked down the aisle together, hand in hand, Caleb felt the sting of the crowd's judgment. Their whispers weren't just about the age difference or the racial divide. They were about power, about control, about the audacity of a black man standing beside one of the wealthiest women in the city. But the real shock would come later, when Caleb began to uncover the layers of Eleanor's past and the true reason she had chosen him. Caleb quickly learned that being married to Eleanor Hartley was anything but simple. Their newly shared life thrust him into a world he had only seen in movies, private jets, extravagant parties, and a never-ending stream of whispers behind closed doors. At first, Caleb tried to focus on the positives. For the first time in his life, he wasn't struggling to pay rent or wondering where his next meal would come from. Eleanor was generous, ensuring he had everything he needed, and more. But the perks came at a cost. One evening, as Caleb stepped into the lavish living room of Eleanor's estate, she handed him a folder. "You'll need to memorize this," she said, her tone brisk. "What is it?" Caleb asked, flipping it open. Inside were detailed profiles of her associates, complete with photographs and notes about their preferences and pet peeves. "Names, backgrounds, conversation starters," Eleanor explained. "These people are powerful, and they'll expect you to keep up." Caleb raised an eyebrow. "I thought I was just supposed to stand beside you and look charming." Eleanor's gaze hardened. "You're more than arm candy, Caleb. You're my partner. That means you represent me, and I won't tolerate anything less than perfection." Her words stung, but Caleb swallowed his pride. He spent hours poring over the folder, committing every detail to memory. When the next event came, a gala hosted by one of Eleanor's oldest friends, he was ready. The room was a sea of tailored suits and designer gowns. Caleb could feel the weight of every gaze as he entered with Eleanor. The whispers were louder now, their judgment sharper. "Is that her husband? He's so young. Must be nice to marry into money." Caleb ignored them, focusing instead on the task at hand. He smiled, made polite conversation, and played his part flawlessly. By the end of the night, even Eleanor seemed impressed. As they rode home in the back of her limo, she broke the silence. "You did well tonight." "Thanks," Caleb said, though her tone made it feel less like a compliment and more like a report card. Eleanor hesitated before adding, "I know this isn't easy for you." Caleb looked at her, surprised by the hint of vulnerability in her voice. "Why me, Eleanor? You could have chosen anyone. Why did you pick me?" She was silent for a long moment, her gaze fixed on the city lights outside. Finally, she said, "Because you remind me of someone I once knew." Before Caleb could press her further, the limo pulled up to the estate. Eleanor stepped out without another word, leaving him alone with his thoughts. The more Caleb settled into his role, the more he began to notice the cracks in Eleanor's perfect exterior. She was meticulous and composed in public, but behind closed doors, she seemed haunted. One night, Caleb woke to find her sitting in the study, staring at an old photograph. He approached quietly, unsure if he should say anything. "Who's that?" he asked gently. Eleanor startled, quickly tucking the photo away. "No one important." But Caleb caught a glimpse before she could hide it, a younger Eleanor standing beside a black man who looked strikingly similar to him. "Is that why you chose me?" Caleb asked, his voice tinged with frustration. "Because I remind you of him?" Eleanor's expression hardened. "I chose you because I saw potential. Don't read into it more than that." But Caleb couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story. The photograph, the way she avoided certain questions, the tension that seemed to linger between them, it all pointed to a deeper truth Eleanor was keeping from him. Determined to uncover the truth, Caleb began to dig. Late at night, when Eleanor was asleep, he searched the house for clues. He found locked drawers, hidden compartments, and files marked private. One evening, as he explored the attic, he stumbled upon an old box labeled with Eleanor's maiden name. Inside were letters, photographs, and newspaper clippings. One article in particular caught his eye. A story about a scandal involving Eleanor and a man named Marcus Fields, a promising young entrepreneur who had been driven out of business under mysterious circumstances. The more Caleb read, the more questions he had. Who was Marcus Fields? What had happened between him and Eleanor? And why did she seem so intent on keeping Caleb in the dark? As he closed the box and returned it to its place, Caleb knew one thing for certain. Whatever secrets Eleanor was hiding, they were about to change everything. Caleb couldn't shake the name Marcus Fields from his mind. The more he thought about it, the more certain he became that Marcus held the key to Eleanor's secrets. But digging deeper wasn't going to be easy. Eleanor was nothing if not guarded. One morning, as Eleanor left for a business meeting, Caleb took the opportunity to do some research. With the article in hand, he combed through online archives, piecing together Marcus Fields' story. Marcus Fields had been a brilliant entrepreneur in the 1980s, known for his innovative ideas and charismatic leadership. He had founded a thriving tech company that was poised to revolutionize the industry. But just as his company began to gain traction, a scandal erupted. Allegations of embezzlement and misconduct surfaced, tarnishing his reputation. The articles were damning, painting Marcus as a villain. But as Caleb read further, he noticed discrepancies. Witness testimonies that contradicted each other. Financial records that didn't quite add up. And then, buried deep in the comments section of an old forum, he found a name: Eleanor Hartley. It turned out that Eleanor, then a rising star in the corporate world, had been closely associated with Marcus during his prime. They had worked together on several high-profile projects, and rumors suggested their relationship went beyond professional. But after the scandal broke, Eleanor distanced herself from Marcus entirely. Caleb's heart raced as he read on. Could Eleanor have been involved in the scandal? Had she played a role in Marcus's downfall? As these questions swirled in his mind, Caleb heard the sound of Eleanor's car pulling into the driveway. He quickly closed his laptop, hiding the evidence of his search. That evening, as they sat down to dinner, Caleb couldn't help but study Eleanor more closely. She seemed calm, poised as ever, but he noticed the faintest trace of tension in her posture. "Eleanor," Caleb began cautiously, "can I ask you something?" She raised an eyebrow, setting down her fork. "Of course. Do you know someone named Marcus Fields?" The question landed like a thunderclap. Eleanor froze, her expression unreadable, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of emotion: anger, fear. "Why do you ask?" she said finally, her tone carefully controlled. "I came across his name in an article," Caleb said, keeping his voice steady. "He seemed important to you. I just wanted to know more." Eleanor's jaw tightened. "Marcus was a part of my past, but it's not a story I'm interested in revisiting." Caleb hesitated, then pressed further. "Why not? It seems like there's more to it than you're letting on." Eleanor's gaze sharpened. "What exactly are you implying, Caleb?" "I'm not implying anything," he said quickly. "You just what?" she interrupted, her voice rising. "You think you can waltz into my life and start asking questions about things you don't understand?" Caleb leaned back, stunned by her outburst. "I'm not trying to accuse you of anything, Eleanor. I just want to know the truth." Eleanor stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "The truth is complicated, Caleb. And it's not something you're ready to hear." She left the room before he could respond, her footsteps echoing down the hall. The tension between them lingered in the days that followed. Eleanor threw herself into her work, avoiding Caleb whenever possible. Caleb, meanwhile, couldn't let the matter rest. One afternoon, he decided to take a bold step. He reached out to one of Marcus Fields' former associates, a man named Harold Sinclair, whose contact information he had found in the forum thread. "Harold," Caleb began after introducing himself over the phone, "I'm trying to learn more about Marcus Fields. Can you help me?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Finally, Harold said, "Marcus Fields was one of the best men I ever knew, and what happened to him was an injustice. If you're serious about finding the truth, meet me tomorrow at Café Montclair. But be prepared. This story doesn't have a happy ending." The next afternoon, Caleb sat at a corner table in Café Montclair, nursing a cup of coffee as he waited for Harold Sinclair. The cafe buzzed with the soft murmur of conversation and the clinking of cups, but Caleb's mind was elsewhere, preoccupied with the questions that had haunted him since his last conversation with Eleanor. When Harold arrived, Caleb recognized him instantly from old photographs. He was an older man now, his face lined with age, but his eyes still carried a sharpness that hinted at a keen mind. "You must be Caleb," Harold said, extending a hand. Caleb nodded, shaking it firmly. "Thank you for meeting me. I know this might be a sensitive topic." Harold sighed as he settled into his seat. "Sensitive doesn't begin to cover it, but if you're here to dig up the truth, you deserve to hear it all." Harold began his story, his voice low but steady. Marcus Fields had been more than just a brilliant entrepreneur. He had been a visionary, a man with a knack for bringing people together and inspiring loyalty. But his meteoric rise had made him enemies, particularly among powerful competitors who saw him as a threat. Eleanor was Marcus's closest ally, Harold explained. She was sharp, ambitious, and loyal to a fault. They made a formidable team, but that loyalty came at a price. Caleb leaned forward. "What do you mean?" "Marcus was framed," Harold said bluntly. "The embezzlement scandal? It was orchestrated by one of his rivals. They planted false evidence, bribed witnesses, and used the media to destroy his reputation. And Eleanor, she was caught in the crossfire." According to Harold, Eleanor had been forced to make an impossible choice. The rival company's lawyers had approached her with an ultimatum: testify against Marcus or face charges herself. They had evidence, fabricated but damning, that could ruin her career and send her to prison. "She betrayed him," Harold said, his voice heavy with regret. "Not because she wanted to, but because she felt she had no other choice. And when Marcus realized what had happened, he didn't blame her. He told her to do it, to save herself." Caleb sat back, stunned. "So she testified against him, knowing it would destroy him?" "Yes," Harold said, his expression grim. "And it broke her. Marcus went to prison, his company collapsed, and Eleanor walked away with her career intact. But she's carried the guilt ever since." Caleb felt a wave of emotions: sympathy, anger, confusion. He thought about the Eleanor he knew, strong, confident, untouchable. But beneath that exterior was a woman haunted by the decisions she had made. "Why didn't she try to clear his name?" Caleb asked. "She did," Harold said, quietly, behind the scenes. "She spent years trying to gather evidence to exonerate him, but the people who framed Marcus were too powerful, too well connected. By the time she had enough leverage, it was too late. Marcus had died in prison." The words hit Caleb like a punch to the gut. He couldn't imagine the pain Eleanor must have endured, knowing she had contributed to Marcus's downfall, even if she had been coerced. "She built her empire as a way to atone," Harold continued. "Every deal she made, every success she achieved, it was her way of honoring Marcus's legacy, but no amount of success could erase the guilt." As Caleb listened, he felt his resentment toward Eleanor begin to shift. He had married her thinking he understood who she was, a shrewd businesswoman, a woman of power and privilege. But now he saw the depth of her humanity, the scars she carried beneath her polished exterior. "Why are you telling me all this?" Caleb asked. Harold fixed him with a steady gaze. "Because you care about her, and because she needs someone who can see past her walls, someone who can remind her that she's more than the mistakes she's made." Caleb nodded slowly, his resolve strengthening. He knew what he had to do. That evening, Caleb returned to the estate with a renewed sense of purpose. The grandeur of the mansion felt less imposing now, the weight of its history less suffocating. Instead, it seemed to embody Eleanor's resilience, a monument to the sacrifices and struggles that had shaped her life. Eleanor was in her study when Caleb found her, seated at her desk with a glass of wine and a stack of documents. The soft glow of the lamp illuminated her face, etched with the faint lines of weariness and solitude. She looked up as he entered, her expression guarded. "Caleb, did you find what you were looking for?" He hesitated for a moment, then stepped closer. "I found more than I expected." Her gaze sharpened, but she said nothing, waiting for him to continue. "I spoke to Harold," Caleb began, his voice steady but gentle. "He told me everything about Marcus, about what happened to him, and to you." Eleanor's eyes widened slightly, her composure faltering. She turned away, as though bracing herself for a storm. "I see," she said quietly. Caleb moved closer, his tone softening. "You've been carrying this for so long, haven't you? The guilt, the regret. Building this empire to honor Marcus, trying to make amends for something you couldn't control." "I don't need your pity," Eleanor said sharply, her voice trembling. "I made my choices. I live with them." "It's not pity," Caleb said firmly. "It's understanding. You were trapped, Eleanor, forced to choose between saving yourself and protecting someone you loved. Anyone in your position would have done the same." She turned to face him, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "You don't know that. You don't know the weight of betraying someone who trusted you, of watching them pay the price for your cowardice." Caleb reached for her hand, his touch gentle but insistent. "You're not a coward. You're human. You did what you thought you had to do to survive. And the fact that you've spent your life trying to make it right, that says everything about the kind of person you are." Eleanor's composure cracked, a single tear slipping down her cheek. "I don't deserve forgiveness," she whispered. "That's not for me to decide," Caleb said. "But I do know this. You've built something incredible out of the ashes of that pain, and you've given me a chance to be part of it, not just the wealth, but the purpose behind it." Eleanor looked at him, her defenses crumbling. For the first time she allowed herself to feel the weight of her own emotions, to let someone else shoulder a part of the burden she had carried for so long. In the days that followed, Caleb and Eleanor began to rebuild their relationship, this time on a foundation of honesty and mutual respect. They worked together to honor Marcus's legacy, expanding Eleanor's philanthropic initiatives and using her resources to fight for justice and equality. The whispers about their marriage didn't disappear overnight, but Caleb no longer cared. He knew the truth about Eleanor, about the strength and vulnerability that defined her. And as they faced the world together, he found that their partnership, once built on assumptions and misunderstandings, had transformed into something far deeper. One evening, as they stood on the balcony overlooking the sprawling estate, Caleb turned to Eleanor. "Do you ever think about what Marcus would say if he could see all this?" Eleanor smiled faintly, her eyes reflecting a mix of sadness and pride. "I think he'd tell me to stop being so hard on myself. And then he'd probably criticize my taste in furniture." Caleb chuckled, slipping his arm around her. "He'd be proud of you, Eleanor, of everything you've accomplished. And so am I." Eleanor leaned into him, the weight of her past finally beginning to lift. Together they looked out at the horizon, their future stretching before them, uncertain but full of possibility.